It was in the wet, sullen spring of '89 that I first heard the name of the widow's Locket, and I confess it sent a chill through me, quite independent of the weather. London had that day a leaden cast, the sky hanging low like a lid, and the pavements giving back the reflections of lamps long before the hour that justified them. I had been detained upon professional business in the neighbourhood of Cavendish Square, and having concluded it, turned my steps to Baker Street with the intention of spending an evening by my old friend's fire. There are seasons when Holmes's rooms act upon me as a tonic. The keen scent of his tobacco, the scattered monographs, his violin lying mute across a chair, and the certainty that at any moment some oddity of human conduct will be seized and held up to the light. On this occasion, however, the tonic was less in the repose of that familiar chamber than in the extraordinary agitation of a visitor who arrived upon my heels. I had found Holmes cross-legged in the armchair opposite the hearth, his head thrown back, eyes narrowed to slits, fingers pressed together at their tips in his favourite attitude of meditation. He greeted me with a languid nod, and I had scarce set my hat upon its peg when our bell clamoured in a manner that suggested less a caller than a summons. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a lady wrapped in sable, the shaking of whose gloved hands made the small jet beads upon her veil quiver and tinkle faintly, like a rosary in a tremulous grasp. She was perhaps 35, but grief, or the ghost of it, had traced premature delicacy upon her features. The veil was lifted and disclosed a pale oval face, the sort of face the old painters loved, clear brow, sensitive mouth, and eyes that had not slept. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she asked, and the voice, though low, possessed a steadiness that the hands belied. "My name," said Holmes. "Pray be seated. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. You may speak before him with the same freedom as before myself." She inclined her head to me. "I am Eleanor, Lady Blackwater." Holmes's eyes, which had appeared half-closed, opened at that, though he did not otherwise stir. The Blackwater title was known to me as one of the older peerages of our country, with estates in Cornwall and a London house in Grosvenor Square. "You have come from Grosvenor Square now," Holmes observed, "and you have come in a carriage, though you dislike them. You were once fond of walking at night, but you no longer are." Her lips parted, and for the first time a touch of colour came into her cheeks. How could you possibly—" "The rain has spared your hem," Holmes murmured, "yet the shoulder of your cloak shows the pattern of a splash that could only come from the wheel of a brougham. There is a faint odour of old leather, carriage straps, rather than the sharp ascent of a new hansom. The reluctance you showed in stepping across the threshold," Mrs. Hudson had to repeat herself, "belongs to one whose old habit of freedom is under siege by present fear. But we waste your time, Lady Blackwater. Will you tell me why you have not slept?" She was silent a moment, pressing the fingers of one glove into the other, as though life had become too full of objects to be borne in the hand. "It is because of a certain locket, Mr. Holmes," she said at last. "A locket that will not stay where it is put." Holmes glanced at me, and I confess that a little prickle ran along my scalp. "Go on." "It belonged to my husband's mother," Lady Blackwater continued. "She died in the first year of our marriage, bequeathing it to me as my last consoling emblem. It is an oval of gold, very old, with a miniature inside, my husband as a boy, and a wisp of hair bound round with a silver thread. There is also an inscription in Latin which I do not wholly understand. I wore it always, as she charged me to do, until the winter my husband died." She paused. Holmes made no sound. "He was taken from me in a hunting accident at Blackwater Chase," she said, and for a moment the steadiness left her voice. The locket, which I had worn that morning, had somehow unfastened and was found later in his jacket pocket by a groom. We thought little of it then. His fingers were always busy and absent, until I came to London last month, and something occurred which I am told is beyond all natural explanation. The locket has thrice been stolen from my person, and thrice returned to my pillow before dawn, wrapped in the same scrap of black silk. And last night, a man was found dead in my dressing-room, the locket upon his chest. Even Holmes's cool composure suffered a check. Dead in your dressing-room? She bowed her head. It was after a musical. I retired early from the company, pleading a faintness which was not wholly imagined. My maid, Alice Rook, prepared me. I dismissed her, locked the door, as the house is large and the servants' stairs open near, and lay down. At some hour beyond midnight I woke from a hideous dream to discover that someone was in the room. I could not move. I could not cry out. There was a shape at the foot of the bed. The fireplace had sunk to red eyes. The shape glided, towards the dressing table where my jewels lay. I heard no drawer, no step. Then all was darkness again. When the dawn came, and with it the courage to rise, I saw— "The man," said Holmes softly. "A young man, unknown to me, dressed like a tradesman's clerk. He lay upon the rug, one hand clawed against his throat, the other palm up as if to beg. His eyes were— oh, forgive me." She shuddered. His eyes were open and filmed. Upon his chest, upon the waistcoat, the locket was placed as if a priest had set it there. It was fastened shut. There was no mark upon him. The door was still locked from the inside. My bell-pull was tied to the bedpost with a neat bow. And upon the looking-glass someone had written, with the vapour of breath upon the cold, the words, "It returns to its widow." For a long moment there was no sound but the ticking of the mantel clock and the hissing of a coal collapsing in the grate. Holmes's gaze had travelled to the fire and was fixed there with the intensity of a huntsman watching a covert. He did not, as some men would, smile at the talk of gliding shapes and breath-written messages. He neither scoffed nor soothed. He merely listened as though the entire city had reduced itself to this one narrative thread, and he had it between finger and thumb. "Scotland Yard," he said at length. "Sent for at once." Inspector Lestrade came himself. A faint, unhappy smile touched her mouth. He was very determined that the matter was a case of common housebreaking with a tragic sequel. He thinks the young man climbed the servants' stair, found the door ajar, though it was not, and suffered some seizure. As for the locket, he calls its position stage play. He was most insistent I should send it to his keeping at once. I refused. I do not know if I was right. Holmes's nostrils flared as if he had caught the scent of something sharp. "Where is the locket now?" "Here." From the sable muff she produced a small morocco case, and, opening it with a faint click, revealed upon its velvet bed an oval glimmer that seemed to catch the firelight and hold it. There was a peculiar quality to that gold, a greenish warmth as of metal, long in intimacy with the human body. The miniature within, when she pressed a spring, was of a boy with a grave, old-fashioned gaze and a mouth too firm for childhood. Around the curl of hair ran a filament of silver, so fine one might have mistaken it for a beam of light. Holmes did not touch it. He leaned forward and inhaled, very slightly as a man might inhale at a glass of rare Tokay. "You keep lavender in your drawers," he said abstractedly. "But there is also a fainter odour, myrrh? No, gum benzoin perhaps, and, a mere suggestion of verdigris." "I am told it is very old," she murmured. "Roman work reset in the last century. My husband used to say it had a temper of its own. Mr. Holmes, I do not ask you to believe in curses. I do not wish to believe in them myself. but I am watched in my own house. Servants go pale and cross themselves. My maid, Alice, is missing since this morning. The lock was forced upon her trunk and a handful of trinkets taken, to lend the look of theft, but her best boots are gone and her Sunday dress with them. Lestrade says she has fled for fear of implication. I do not know anything save that the locket returns when it is taken, and last night a man lay dead at my feet. Holmes rose. When he moves, suddenly after long stillness, there is in him a pantherish grace that never fails to startle me. He went to the window, and with his long fingers parted the blind, though there was little to be seen but a ribbon of shining street and the glimmer of a passing cab. "Watson," said he without turning, "your hat." "My hat?" I repeated, a little taken aback. "If we delay, we shall arrive only in time to hear what clumsy reasoning has already destroyed. Lady Blackwater, be so good as to take your carriage again. We shall follow you to Grosvenor Square." She rose, relief and fresh terror contending in her eyes. "You will come, now?" "Now," said Holmes, "for if a thing glides, it does not glide forever, and if a door is locked, there is always some man who thinks the lock an insult. Come, Watson, the game is cold, but it is afoot." The rain had flattened to a clammy mist by the time we followed Lady Blackwater's brougham into Grosvenor Square, where each lamp burned inside its own pale halo. Number 12 showed a sober frontage and a constable soaked to the bone. He saluted our companion and stood aside. Within, the hall smelled of coal and wax. The marble bore the smear of recent wheels. Holmes paused only to taste the air, then addressed the butler, Clavers. "No one enters or leaves until I say so. Assemble the servants in the morning room." He touched my sleeve. "Doctor, the skirting, freshly scraped. A trunk was dragged here within a day. Lady Blackwater, if you please." She led us up a broad stair and along a corridor of ancestral portraits, whose eyes followed us with cold suspicion. At the end, a door showed splintered wood about the strike. "Lestrade's doing," she murmured. "He wished the lock entire. I begged him to spare the room." The key turned. We entered her dressing-room. It was orderly in that way which suggests not neatness, but solitude. A fire had fallen to a red hush. A cheval glass faced the hearth. An ottoman lay beneath the windows. Upon the rug the pile was crushed where a body had lain. The police had circled the outline with chalk. Holmes went to his knees and set his lens to the bell cord, which had been drawn to the bedpost and tied with a neat bow. "A left-handed maker," he said softly, "and a man taught on small craft. River knots, quick to tie, quick to loose. The bow is a flourish. The true purpose was to shorten the pull. Someone did not wish Our Lady to summon aid by an involuntary twitch." He touched the cord and sniffed his finger. "Gum benzoin. The same odour clings to the locket's case." He crossed to the window. The lower sash rose easily. "Unlatched after the event. Soot smudged inward. No escape that way." At the door he crouched again. "Forced this morning by the yard, but meddled with last night from within. See the bruise upon the bolt? Not a chisel. An improvised wedge slid through the crack and recovered by thread. Our intruder secured the door, made his arrangements, and afterward withdrew the tool, leaving an honest show of isolation." He smiled without mirth. "You think the dead man was not the thief?" I asked. "He was the text," Holmes replied. Another hand arranged the letters. Lady Blackwater, who had watched with her gloved hands interlaced, whispered, "And the words on the glass?" Holmes breathed upon the mirror. The phrase, "it returns to its widow," sprang pale and vanished. He measured the height with a finger. Written from the shoulder of a tall man, the upstrokes heavier than the down, a sign writer's habit when composing in reverse for the street. We shall ask London's bill painters to lend us their alphabets. The handle rattled. Inspector Lestrade entered, compact and energetic, with rain still beading his lashes. "Mr. Holmes, Doctor, my lady." He planted himself over the chalked outline. "Here is a simple matter. Housebreaker after baubles takes fright and drops where he stands. The locket on his chest is play-acting to scare nerves." "And the knot upon the bell cord?" said Holmes. "Play-acting again." "And the resin smear upon the fender?" Lestrade blinked. "Upon whose fender?" "The one in this room." Holmes's tone grew amiable. "You had the body removed?" "At once," said Lestrade. "He is at the mortuary. There was no need to rummage him further." "Then we shall do it now," Holmes returned in that light voice which permits no parley. "But first, Alice Rook." Clavers conducted us to the servants' floor. The maid's small cell had been overturned in the manner beloved by clumsy thieves, a cheap trunk split, drawers yawning. Holmes touched the lid's nail-heads and then went to his knees upon the boards. "Dragged, not carried," he said, indicating faint grazes running from bed to door. "And in haste, yet the best boots and Sunday dress are missing by choice. Now, flight, certainly, but see here." From behind the skirting, he teased out a paper twist and opened it. "Powdered benzoin." "Female," said Lestrade. "Possibly," Holmes allowed. "But the knot is a sailor's, the mirror hand a painter's. Two crafts in one pair of hands are uncommon. I think two visitors, not one. And of these only one glides." Lady Blackwater looked from one to the other of us with that brave steadiness I had admired in Baker Street. "If there are two," she said, "which brings the locket back?" "The one who understands it," Holmes answered. He rose. The quick grace of the movement startled me. "To the mortuary, Lestrade. What's in your bag? I wish to see the throat, the nails and the tongue. If fear killed him, there will be its signature. If pressure, the others. With luck, we shall find beneath a nail a filament no thicker than light, silver perhaps, and learn what temper that oval trinket keeps and why it returns as surely as a bird to its nest." The mortuary at King's Cross was a grim place at the best of times, and under a lantern's hiss it acquired a quality half spectral, half surgical. The attendants, knowing Holmes of old, admitted us without ceremony. Lestrade, impatient of chill and smell alike, urged the keeper forward until we stood beside a trestle draped in canvas. The sheet was drawn back to reveal a pale, slack face, the mouth half open, as if words had been frozen there. The lad could not have seen his 25th year. His hands lay stiff across his chest, the nails darkened faintly at the roots. Holmes bent low, his gaze roving with the patience of a jeweller appraising flawed stone. "Note, Watson, the slight congestion about the lips," he murmured. "There is cyanosis, yet no sign of throttling. The tongue is indented along the margins, a mark of sudden spasm. We may exclude strangulation. Some toxin, what say you?" I examined carefully, lifting the jaw and peering into the pharynx. No swelling of the glottis, no froth, no odour such as opiates leave. The nails show no effusion beneath the beds. The heart, had we opened it, might reveal collapse from shock. I should say syncope, violent, instantaneous. "Induced?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "It could be terror," I allowed, "but that is a perilous diagnosis. The body's chemistry, unseen, may hold the key." Holmes drew from the man's vest pocket a small scrap folded upon itself. It had escaped the yard search by clinging in the lining. With long fingers he opened it. There lay a thread, finer than cobweb, silvery in the light. He placed it upon the lantern glass. It quivered, as if alive. "You see, Lestrade, The filament of silver, our friend, did not lie. Lestrade made a sound of irritation. A thread. London has threads enough to hang a regiment. I want facts. You have them, Holmes returned quietly. This man died of an influence as sure as a noose. The filament is but its herald. He turned the lad's hand outward. On the palm were faint abrasions, crescent in form, clutching at his breast. Not at a knife, not at a foe, at the locket, Lestrade. Whatever lay within or about that trinket stopped his heart. Lady Blackwater, who had borne the sight with pallid fortitude, whispered, "Then it is true, the locket is cursed." Holmes replaced the sheet. "Not cursed, madam, contrived. Curses do not tie knots nor write on mirrors. There is artifice here, concealed beneath superstition, and some mind labours to persuade you of a legend's truth. We must discover why." The carriage bore us back through damp streets, where the gaslights were clouded halos in the mist. Holmes sat forward, chin on fist, eyes shut as though in reverie, yet I knew the engine of his brain was working with furious precision. At last he said, "Two hands, Watson, one that glides, one that paints. If they are not in league, they are rivals. Each regards the locket as a talisman. One restores it, the other exploits it. Between them lies our corpse." "And Alice Rook?" "Ah." He opened his eyes. "The maid who vanishes when the legend grows loudest. She knows whether the silk wrapping was left by guardian or deceiver. We must find her." At Grosvenor Square again, Holmes demanded of Clavers every servant's record, from pantry boy to coachman. The butler's protestations of loyalty were received with a lifted hand. Holmes requested the keys of the late Lord Blackwater's escritoire, with inlay papers, orderly and precise, yet Holmes drew one out at once, an account of antiquities purchased in Naples 10 years past. Among them was an entry, oval pendant, Etruscan, inscribed, with hair of infant enclosed. The seller's name was smudged, but beside it was scrawled G.R. "G.R.," I repeated, "initials only." "Not initials, an abbreviation," Holmes corrected. "Think of our island's ports. Genoa Road, perhaps. Or, no, Lady Blackwater, did your husband speak of one Gideon Roffey?" Her eyes widened. "Yes. He was an antiquarian, a dealer in curious objects. My husband bought books from him and odd medals, but he was disgraced, convicted of fraud, they said, and disappeared. Then reappeared, perhaps, as our clerkly corpse." Holmes tapped the parchment. "Roffey sells what he cannot explain, then returns to reclaim it when he sees its potential in another's hand. But another has forestalled him, has used the legend to build dread. He died upon the threshold of the scheme." The hall clock struck 2. Holmes stood with sudden decision. "Watson, we must not sleep. At dawn we shall seek the painter's yard near Tottenham Court, where sign-writers ply their art. By nightfall we must know whose hand wrote upon that mirror. Only then shall we trace the glide to its master." The dawn was a grey one, the mist lying low over the city, and giving each rooftop the look of a drowned relic emerging from some spectral tide. Holmes had roused me before the light had properly broken, and after a hasty breakfast we made our way into the bustle of Tottenham Court Road. Already the hum of commerce began to rise from costermongers' carts, the calls of milkmen, and the distant grind of tram wheels. Holmes walked briskly, his coat-tails swinging, the brim of his hat pulled low against the drizzle, his eyes roving along the shop fronts with the eagerness of a falcon on the wing. He paused here and there at painted boards displayed outside workshops, scrutinizing the flourishes of lettering as though they were signatures in a ledger. "You see, Watson," he remarked, indicating a sign freshly painted in gold upon a green ground. "The thickened upstroke is a rarity. Most men, untrained, make their downstroke the heavier. To form the reverse requires conscious habit. Somewhere in this quarter, a hand practiced in such reversals has lent itself to the masquerade at Grosvenor Square. We passed a succession of narrow courts where painters worked amidst the odour of turpentine. Holmes stopped before a shed whose open doors revealed half a dozen. Boards in progress, advertisements for patent soaps, a music hall and a wine merchant. The letters were clean, precise and unmistakably heavier on the up. Holmes stepped inside with his usual air of belonging wherever he went. A lean fellow with sleeves rolled to the elbow glanced up from a brush he held poised above a line of lettering. His eyes were pale and wary, and though he forced a smile, I saw a tremor pass along his jaw. "Work's not for sale, gentlemen, orders only." Holmes raised his hat. "We do not come to buy, but to admire. An admirable hand you have, sir, steady and confident, your reversals especially. May I ask, do you also letter glass for shop windows?" The man hesitated. "Sometimes, when it's asked." "Then perhaps you could oblige me by writing a phrase upon this mirror fragment." Holmes produced from his pocket a small shard, taken, I realized, from Lady Blackwater's dressing-room. "The words are simple. It returns to its widow." The fellow's brush slipped, spattering the green board with a blotch of paint. He swore softly, and his eyes darted toward the open street. Holmes moved with pantherine swiftness, interposing himself. "Steady, Mr. Gerald," he said. "For such, I take it, is your name, formerly of the firm Gerald & Pine, dismissed last year for petty theft. You see, I make it my business to read the city as you read your alphabet." Gerald's pallor confirmed the guess. "I had no hand in murder," he muttered. "By God, I didn't." "Nor do I say you had. You were hired, I presume, to play a part. A note slipped under your door, a guinea promised for a few words breathed upon a lady's glass." He nodded reluctantly. "It was 2 guineas. All I had to do was write it when the house was quiet, and leave by the servants' stair. They said it was a jest to frighten a maid. I never saw no corpse." "They?" Holmes pressed. Gerald licked his lips. "A sailor chap, scar across his cheek, carried himself like he'd trod aft the seas. Met me in a tavern by the docks, the Grappler, off Wapping. Said his mistress wanted a lesson taught." Holmes's eyes gleamed with the light I knew well. "You have served us better than you know, Mr. Gerald. I advise you to remain in your shed until we send for you. If you attempt flight, the yard will be less indulgent than I." We emerged again into the road, and Holmes's stride quickened. "You perceive, Watson, the knot upon the bell cord was sailor's work. Here, then, is our gliding intruder, the one who moves unseen through a great house. The painter was but a pawn, hired for ornament. The true mover of events is this seaman, and behind him someone with means to command his service." "And the maid Alice?" I asked. "Precisely. A young woman might be lured by promise or cowed by threat. We must discover which. If she be with them willingly, she is dangerous. If not, she is in peril. Either way, she is the next piece upon our board." We took a cab eastward through streets that grew narrower, dirtier, and more odorous with fish and tar. The Grappler proved to be a low den with a cracked sign swaying above its door. Holmes pushed within, and I followed into an atmosphere of smoke, sour beer, and damp wood. A handful of mariners hunched over their mugs, their speech thick with dialect. Behind the counter, a broad woman with a shawl regarded us with suspicion. Holmes addressed her in a voice that carried authority without the need of threat. "We seek a sailor, scarred upon the cheek, known here as a frequenter, tall, with the gait of a quarterdeck. His name, if you please." The woman's eyes narrowed. "And if I say I never seen him?" "Then I shall conclude he is a patron so regular, you wish not to lose him, but I fancy your honesty outweighs your custom." Her gaze flicked aside. Name of Briggs. Gideon Briggs. Been in twice this week. Keeps a girl with him, a slip of a thing with dark hair and frightened eyes. Don't sit easy, that one. He watches her too close. Holmes and I exchanged a glance. The picture was plain enough. Watson, he said, we must tread warily. Briggs is the hand, but whose mind directs him? That, and that alone, will explain why a locket drips with dread. As we left the tavern, the mist had thickened, wrapping the dockside in folds of grey. Somewhere a bell tolled from a moored steamer. Holmes set his jaw and hailed a cab. Back to Baker Street, we require maps of Wapping, a list of vessels berthed this month, and a whisper with an old ally of mine upon the river. Tonight we hunt our gliding sailor. The cab rattled northward through the mist, and Holmes sat rigid, his gaze fixed beyond the blur of the window, as if the fog itself concealed the pattern he sought. I had long since learned not to interrupt such silences. They were the crucible in which his deductions fused. Only when we turned into Baker Street did he stir, and even then his words came measured, as though weighing each syllable. Watson, we have in Briggs the hand, in Gerald the flourish, and in Lady Blackwater the stage, but who composes the play? The author remains unseen, and until we draw him forth, we shall only circle the footlights. We climbed the familiar stairs to find the fire already banked by Mrs. Hudson, and the table spread with maps and papers Holmes had commanded by telegram earlier that morning. He bent at once to a large Admiralty chart of the Thames, dotted with mooring slips and the silhouettes of berthed vessels. With the point of his long finger, he traced a line from Wapping Stairs to the Pool of London. Briggs is no common loafer, he mused. The description marks him as one who has served before the mast, and not without discipline. Such men cling to the water like barnacles. Let us see. He rifled through a sheaf of dock records, reading aloud names. The Maid of Oslo, the Resolute, Artemis, until at last he stopped. The Seamew, in from Smyrna last fortnight, master at Caleb Briggs and her crew, lists a Gideon Briggs as mate. Brother, perhaps. Blood runs thick on the river, Watson, thicker than the tide. Before I could reply, there came a knock, brisk and familiar. A burly figure entered, his coat still wet from the key. "Wiggins, sir," he announced, tugging a forelock. "You sent word." The lad I remembered as chief of the Baker Street irregulars had grown into a man, his shoulders broad, but the spark of mischief still lit his eyes. "Excellent, Wiggins," Holmes said warmly. "I require your ears upon the wharves. A sailor, scarred upon the cheek, name of Briggs, keeps company with a young woman, dark-haired and fearful. Learn where they lodge, what errand brings them ashore, and whether the Seamew sails again soon. Report to me before nightfall." "With pleasure, sir," Wiggins said, and vanished with a grin. Holmes stretched his lean frame by the fire, fingers steepled. "We set our trap tonight, Watson. The widow's locket is the bait, Briggs the hound, but the master is still in shadow. We must drive him to reveal himself." The hours passed in tense expectation. I busied myself with notes, yet my mind returned to Lady Blackwater's pale face, to the chalked outline of the corpse, to the thin silver filament quivering in Holmes's lantern light. At length, as the lamps outside were lit, and London's roar sank into a muffled hum, a tap sounded on the window. Holmes drew it open and admitted Wiggins, breathless from his errand. "I found 'em, sir," he whispered. "Briggs lodges in a warehouse by the river near Execution Dock. Keeps the girl close, like a prisoner. Sailors say he's waiting on orders from a gentleman what never shows his face, only pays in sovereigns. They're to leave aboard the Seamew at dawn." "Splendid," Holmes murmured. "Watson, the hour approaches. Fetch your revolver. The river will be thick with fog, and Briggs will not yield easily. Our aim is to secure the maid and follow the thread to the mine that weaves it. By 9 o'clock we were gliding downriver in a hired boat, muffled against the damp. The fog closed about us like a wall, pierced only by the lantern on our prow and the faint boom of unseen bells. Holmes steered with the sureness of one who knew every bend. At last he raised a hand, and our oarsman ceased. A shadow loomed ahead, a warehouse, its broken windows black against the mist. From within came the faintest glow. Holmes touched my arm. "Briggs is there. Keep your weapon ready, but no shot unless in extremity. We deal not only with a seaman, but with the fear he has planted in a young woman's heart. Let us approach like surgeons, not butchers." We slipped ashore. Holmes moved with that uncanny stealth that always amazed me, his long frame bending, his steps noiseless upon the boards. We gained a side door half-rotted from the damp. He pressed it open, and we entered a gloom smelling of rope, tar, and mildew. From the far corner came a murmur of voices. We crept closer, peering between stacked barrels. There sat Briggs, the scar livid upon his cheek, his great hands restless upon his knees. Beside him, pale and shrinking, was Alice Rook. Her eyes, wide and desperate, caught mine at once, and she half rose, but Briggs thrust her back with a growl. Holmes stepped forward into the lantern light. "Good evening, Mr. Briggs," he said coolly. "You have something that does not belong to you." Briggs leapt up with a snarl, his hand flashing to a knife at his belt. In that instant Holmes's whistle shrilled, and from the shadows emerged 2 constables Lestrade had stationed by arrangement. Briggs lunged, but found himself seized and overborne. His knife clattered to the floor. Alice gave a cry of relief. "Mr. Holmes, oh, thank heaven, they told me I should never see daylight again." Holmes bent to her with rare gentleness. "You are safe now, my dear. But tell us, who commanded this? Who bade Briggs guard you so jealously?" She shuddered, glancing toward the bound sailor. "He said it was for his master, that the locket must not leave the family, that it held the Blackwater's doom. He never named the man, but he received letters, always signed with a single initial, C." Holmes's eyes glittered. "See, Watson, the curtain rises another notch. We have the hand and the pawn. Now we seek the mind that signs its orders with a letter, and whose purpose in this grim play remains hidden. Let us bring our captive to Grosvenor Square. The next act awaits us there." Briggs, pinioned between the constables, was thrust into the Blackwater drawing-room as the clocks chimed past midnight. The lamps had been lit in haste, casting long, uneasy shadows upon the carved panels and sombre portraits. Lady Blackwater, wrapped in a shawl, stood stiff as a figure of alabaster, her eyes fixed on the seaman with mingled dread and curiosity. Alice Rook clung to her mistress's hand, trembling but resolute. Lestrade, puffed with the triumph of an arrest, busied himself in clearing a space, though his glances at Holmes betrayed unease. For all his bluster, he knew well enough that the prisoner was only a fragment of the truth. Holmes, his face keen as a hawk's, drew a chair before the fire and motioned for Briggs to sit. The sailor refused, squaring his shoulders despite the irons upon his wrists. The scar that raked his cheek seemed to glow red in the lamplight, and his eyes, dark and burning, never left Lady Blackwater. "You can clap me in chains," he growled, "but you'll not silence what I know. That bauble you wear, my lady, it's death to all who dare cross it. Best toss it in the river and be done." "Enough of that," Lestrade snapped. "You'll answer for breaking and entering, for menacing this lady, and for—" Holmes raised a hand. "Pray restrain yourself, Inspector. The man's tongue may yet yield us more than your threats." He leaned forward. "Briggs, you speak of the locket as if you are its keeper. Yet you were but a hound at heel. Whose whistle do you answer? Who signs the letters with a C? The sailor's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he would spit defiance. Then his gaze wavered, darting toward Alice, and I perceived the faintest flicker of shame. I had my orders, he muttered. Gold enough to keep me fed, and a master who'd see me drowned if I disobeyed. That's all I'll say. Holmes's voice sharpened. You mistake me, Briggs. I care not for your fear nor your coin, but you have stumbled upon a game larger than yourself. A pawn that withholds its square is swept from the board. Tell me of this master, and I may yet contrive a safer berth for you than Newgate. The silence stretched. At last Briggs spoke, low and hoarse. The letters came from Cornwall, from the chase itself, signed with C. I never saw the man, but I know whose hand it was. Cecil Blackwater, brother to the late lord. Lady Blackwater gave a sharp cry. Cecil, impossible! He quitted the estate years ago after quarrels over inheritance. My husband scarcely spoke his name. Precisely, Holmes said quietly. The younger brother, cut off from title and fortune, nursing his resentment in exile. He alone would know the Locket's history, and he alone would profit by weaving terror round it. A convenient curse to drive you from your home, my lady, and cast doubt upon your claim. Briggs sneered. Believe what you like, I never met him, only took his gold. If you mean to find him, seek the west. The sea mew was to carry me there with the girl, to keep her tongue still. Alice shuddered, and Lady Blackwater drew her close. Holmes rose and paced the hearth, his hands clasped behind him. It fits too neatly, Watson. Cecil Blackwater in Cornwall, a sailor in London, a painter's trembling hand. Each piece moves at the unseen bidding of one mind. Yet a mind that hides too carefully reveals its caution. If Cecil has contrived this web, he fears exposure. Fear, my dear Watson, is always a chink in armour. Lestrade, who had listened with mounting impatience, burst out, Then we have him. I'll telegraph the Cornish constabulary at once. Holmes shook his head. No, Inspector, to snatch too soon is to startle the fox from his earth. We must first uncover the snare he laid for his sister-in-law. Only when we hold proof of his hand upon the locket will the law bind him. He turned to Lady Blackwater. My lady, the locket is here. She drew it from within her cloak. The gold glimmered strangely, as if it absorbed the lamplight. Holmes took it gingerly, holding it between thumb and forefinger. Once more that faint odour of resin rose from it. Observe, he said, opening the oval. The miniature of the boy stared out, grave and remote. Holmes's lens passed over the silver thread encircling the curl of hair. A clever device, Watson. This thread is no mere ornament. See the minute puncture at its end? A reservoir lies beneath. Some irritant, possibly an alkaloid in resin suspension, could be released by pressure, invisible to the eye, yet deadly to the heart. Our poor clerk, Roffey, must have touched it and paid with his life. A murmur of horror ran through the room. Lady Blackwater pressed a hand to her throat. Then it is true, the locket kills. Holmes snapped the case shut. It is true that a hand sought to make it appear so, but poison is science, not sorcery. And Cecil Blackwater, or whoever hides behind that initial, counted on fear to finish what chemistry began. Lestrade reached for the locket, but Holmes slipped it into his pocket. No, Inspector, it must serve yet a little longer. Our trap is not complete. If Cecil comes to London, he will come for this. When he does, I intend that he shall find more than a bauble. He shall find the law waiting. The clock struck 1, deep and solemn. Holmes gestured to the constables. Take Briggs to the yard, but let no whisper of Cornwall escape your lips. The game must ripen. Then, turning to Lady Blackwater, he added more gently, "Courage, madam. The locket's shadow is long, but we are nearer to its source than you think. Rest tonight if you can. Tomorrow we cast the net wider, and the spider who wove this curse will at last step into view." The following morning broke sharp and clear, the mist of the river swept aside by a keen wind from the east. I found Holmes already at his desk, the locket open before him, a row of small phials and glass rods arranged with the fastidious care of a chemist. His eyes gleamed with that restless light which I knew too well meant that he had scarcely slept, but had worked through the dark hours as steadily as a watch mechanism. Without greeting, he beckoned me over, pointing with a glass rod to the curl of hair within the oval. "Observe, Watson, the silver thread is coated with a resinous compound. When compressed against the skin, it releases a volatile alkaloid. See the faint greenish stain? That is verdigris mingled with a tincture of strophanthus, a poison that acts swiftly on the heart, leaving no mark save the sudden pallor we observed upon poor Roffey. Ingenious, insidious, and perfectly suited to one who wishes to dress up murder as a visitation of the supernatural." I bent closer, marvelling at the delicacy of the device. And yet, Holmes, how could Lady Blackwater wear such a thing daily without harm? "Because the mechanism is designed to act only when tampered with," Holmes replied. "To wear it calmly is harmless. To open it incautiously, to press too firmly, is to trigger death itself. It is no charm of fate, Watson, but a trap set in gold. Cecil Blackwater, if indeed he is our author, would know the locket's double nature. He could feed the legend of the curse, ensuring terror did the work of the toxin." Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes tore it open and passed it silently to me. It was from Lestrade at Scotland Yard. "Briggs, restless in cell. Claims will speak if taken to Blackwater Chase. Urges secrecy. Shall I act?" Holmes's smile was thin. "Our sailor smells his master's shadow at his back. He fears the gallows more than the lash, and so he clutches at us for protection. Excellent, we must oblige him. But to Cornwall we must go ourselves, Watson, not leave the matter to Lestrade. There lies the heart of this labyrinth." By noon we were aboard the train, Lady Blackwater and Alice Rook with us, under Holmes's assurance that safety lay only in confrontation. The countryside streamed past in swift succession, hedgerows silvered with frost, bare fields where crows wheeled, and villages huddled beneath church spires. Lady Blackwater sat pale and composed, her hands clasped upon her lap, while Alice, though still shaken, seemed to draw courage from her mistress's presence. Holmes occupied himself with a bundle of notes, cross-referencing the family tree of the Blackwaters, while I dozed fitfully and wondered at the path upon which we travelled. Evening found us at the small Cornish station, where a carriage awaited to take us to Blackwater Chase. The great house loomed upon its hill like a fortress out of time, its turrets etched against a sky bruised with storm. As we approached up the winding drive, I could feel the weight of centuries pressing from its grey stone. Lady Blackwater clutched my arm, whispering, "I had thought never to see it again. How strange that it feels more like a tomb than a home." Holmes gave a quick glance at the windows, some shuttered, others faintly lit. "A tomb may yet yield its occupant," he said softly. "Keep your courage, madam. Tonight we prise open the vault." The butler who admitted us was an old retainer, bewildered at our sudden arrival. He explained that Cecil Blackwater had returned weeks ago, taking up residence in the western wing, and had ordered the staff to hold themselves ready, though he seldom showed his face. Holmes dismissed the man with instructions for supper and drew us into the long gallery, its walls hung with portraits whose eyes followed us through the gloom. "There," he murmured, pausing before a painting of two boys, one dark and stern, the other fair and smiling. Lord Blackwater as a child, and his younger brother Cecil. Mark the contrast, Watson. The elder grave and steady, the younger restless, ambitious, the seed of rivalry painted plain upon canvas. As we studied the portrait, a soft tread echoed from the far end of the gallery. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man in evening dress, his hair streaked with grey, his eyes burning with suppressed fire. He bowed with stiff formality, though his mouth twisted in something nearer contempt. "So my brother's widow returns," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "And she brings the celebrated Mr. Sherlock Holmes. How flattering! To what do I owe this midnight invasion of my ancestral hall?" Holmes's bow was scarcely more than an inclination of the head. "To the widow's locket, Mr. Cecil Blackwater. It has travelled far and killed one man already. We come to learn why you would turn a family relic into a weapon of fear." Cecil's eyes flicked to the locket in Holmes's hand, and for the briefest instant his composure cracked. Then he smiled, slow and bitter. "You presume much, sir. That trinket is cursed by time itself. I merely keep faith with our history, but perhaps you will learn more than you wish, for the chase is no place for strangers after dark." Holmes regarded him with that stillness which always presaged action. "On the contrary, Mr. Blackwater, it is precisely in the dark that truth shines brightest, and tonight, whether by your hand or by your silence, we shall see it revealed." The storm broke overhead with a crash of thunder, rattling the old windows. I confess a chill ran through me, not from the draughts of the ancient hall, but from the certainty that we had at last reached the heart of the snare, and that the next step would carry us either into light or into mortal peril. The thunder's echoes had not yet faded when Cecil Blackwater advanced a step into the gallery, his figure lit starkly by the flicker of a wall sconce. Lady Blackwater shrank back, but Holmes remained poised, the locket gleaming faintly in his hand. Cecil's eyes clung to it with the intensity of a starving man regarding bread, though his voice, when he spoke, carried a chill restraint. "You mistake me, sir," he said. "That object is my family's burden. My brother was weak enough to cherish it, blind enough to believe in its virtue. I know better. I would see it destroyed before it claims more lives." Holmes's eyebrow lifted. "An admirable sentiment if it had not been preceded by letters commanding sailors to guard it, painters to write its legend, and a maid to be carried off against her will. You have sown fear with one hand and reaped it with the other, a curious method of destruction." Cecil's lips curved in a bitter smile. "Proof, Mr. Holmes? Words from a sailor with more drink than sense? Whispers from a girl who trembles at her own shadow? You stand in my house with accusation, but what do you hold that would satisfy a magistrate?" Holmes allowed himself a brief glance at me, and I recognized the glint that meant he had tightened the net. He placed the locket upon a side table, the firelight gleaming along its curved surface. "I hold enough, Mr. Blackwater, to demonstrate before all present that the so-called curse is but a contrivance, and to show whose hand contrived it." He opened the case, drawing out his lens. "Observe the miniature delicately painted, the curl of hair bound with silver. At the end of that thread is a capillary tube, invisible save under magnification, filled with a tincture as subtle as it is deadly. One touch, one incautious press, and the heart ceases as if smitten by fate. Poor Roffey discovered this to his cost, yet you, sir, knew the device well enough to avoid it. Only a man acquainted with its dual nature could command others to return it without harm." For the first time, Cecil's composure faltered. His hand twitched, then clenched upon his cane. "A pretty tale," he muttered, "but it proves nothing. My brother's widow might equally have known, and sought to rid herself of witnesses." Lady Blackwater uttered a gasp, but Holmes forestalled her with a raised hand. "Indeed, accusation is easily shifted. That is why I invited you here tonight, Mr. Blackwater, to give you the opportunity to clear your name. Will you place your finger upon this thread and hold it there for a moment? If it is harmless, you have nothing to fear." Cecil recoiled a fraction, his eyes narrowing. "A trick? You would have me handle a cursed thing." "Ah," Holmes said softly, "then you admit its danger." A tense silence fell, broken only by the patter of rain against the leaded windows. Alice Rook clung closer to her mistress, and Lestrade, who had joined us by arrangement on the night train, shifted his weight uneasily. He whispered to me, "By George, the fellow looks cornered." Holmes pressed on, his voice calm but relentless. "You see, Mr. Blackwater, we traced every thread. Briggs confessed to your payments. Gerald, the painter, admitted his task. Both spoke of orders signed C, and when the locket was returned, wrapped in black silk, the handwriting on the knot matched samples from your correspondence preserved in the Chase accounts. Your hand is upon every stitch of this scheme. Fear was your weapon, inheritance your prize." Cecil's face darkened, the bitterness in his expression deepening into fury. "Do you think I would watch my brother's fortune squandered by a weakling widow? Do you think I would stand aside while strangers dictate the fate of my house? That trinket was mine by right, and if terror was needed to reclaim it, then terror I used." His voice had risen, echoing in the great gallery like a curse itself. "Better that a few fools quailed than that the Blackwater line wither." Holmes inclined his head slightly as though acknowledging the confession. "You have spoken, sir, and spoken clearly. Lestrade, the law may now take its course." At that, Cecil lunged. His cane swept the locket from the table, and in the same motion he snatched it into his palm. For an instant he held it aloft, his face lit with wild triumph. "It returns to its heir!" he cried. But his grip had closed upon the poisoned thread. A look of horror froze upon his features, his cry choked into a gasp. He staggered back, the locket clattering, from his nerveless fingers, and collapsed heavily upon the marble floor. Lady Blackwater screamed, and Alice buried her face against her shoulder. Lestrade bent swiftly, but one glance was enough. The man's lips were blue, his eyes glassy. "Dead," he muttered, awe in his tone. "Dead in a heartbeat." Holmes stooped, carefully lifting the locket once more by its chain. He examined the fallen figure with a physician's detachment, though I saw a shadow pass across his face. The irony is complete, Watson. He trusted too much in his own knowledge, forgetting that even a master of contrivance may falter. In passion, the very device he meant for others has claimed him. I knelt, feeling for a pulse, but there was none. Cecil Blackwater lay rigid, the storm's light flaring across his still features. Holmes replaced the locket in a sealed pouch, turning to Lady Blackwater with grave courtesy. "Madam, the curse is ended. Its author has perished by his own hand. What remains now is for the law to disentangle the estate, and for you to rest at last free of shadow." She could not answer, only bowed her head, her tears falling silently. Holmes touched her arm with rare gentleness. "The dead cannot harm us further. The living must heal." As the thunder rolled again over the Cornish hills, I felt that the long, dark skein of mystery had at last been severed. Yet in Holmes's eyes there lingered a glimmer of unease, as though some strand of the puzzle yet eluded even him. The storm raged on above the old house, thunder rattling through the windows as though the elements themselves clamoured to be heard. Cecil Blackwater's body lay upon the marble, its features stiffened by the poison's merciless grip. Lestrade, still kneeling at his side, shook his head in astonishment. "I've seen a man hanged, Holmes, and one struck down by lightning, but never aught like this, strangled by a bauble in his own hall. The jury will scarce believe it." Holmes, pacing slowly, regarded the corpse with a gaze that seemed both pitiless and analytical. "It is not the jury's belief that troubles me, Inspector, but the completeness of the matter. A man so cunning, so careful, in concealing his hand undone in the space of a heartbeat. Do you not find the conclusion convenient?" Lestrade blinked. "Convenient? The scoundrel all but confessed before us, then dropped dead of his own folly. I call it justice writ plain." "Justice, perhaps," Holmes murmured, "but too swiftly executed. A hand such as his does not miscalculate so grossly. He knew the locket's nature, Watson, better than any of us. Why grasp it in fury unless—" He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Unless he believed the mechanism had been rendered harmless." I stared. "But Holmes, you yourself sealed the locket. Could he have thought you disabled it?" "More likely," Holmes said. "Someone had whispered it was safe. Therein lies the loose thread." He swung round suddenly to Lady Blackwater, who stood pale but resolute beside Alice. "Madam, your late husband, did he speak often of this relic?" She started, then nodded slowly. "He was devoted to it. He would polish it, study it, almost as though it were an object of science rather than sentiment. He once told me that Cecil was not the only one to covet it. There was a cousin, Charles Blackwater, a distant kinsman who dabbled in alchemy and curious contrivances. He was dismissed from the house years ago under some cloud of disgrace. I had almost forgotten him until now." Holmes's face sharpened, as if a blade had been whetted. "Charles. Another C. The signature upon those letters need not be Cecil's at all. We assume too much, Watson. Cecil may have been a tool as surely as Briggs and Gerald were." Lestrade sprang up. "What? You mean to say we've nabbed the wrong villain? The man's dead at our feet, for heaven's sake." Holmes's voice was like steel. "Dead, yes, but perhaps silenced rather than self-slain. Consider, the locket was placed upon the table by me. For Cecil to snatch it so recklessly, he must have believed it inert. Who but an accomplice could have told him so? And who but Charles, skilled in devices, could have prepared a second reservoir in the thread, timed to discharge upon grasp? This was not justice, Inspector. It was murder, cloaked in poetic irony." A shiver ran through me. The storm outside, the echoing hall, the corpse upon the floor. It seemed we stood within some ghastly play. "Then the true author still lives," I whispered. Holmes inclined his head. "And if my reasoning be sound, he lives within these very walls. He would not abandon his stage before the final act. Watson, fetch the locket case from my pouch. We must examine whether the mechanism has been tampered with since last I studied it." With shaking fingers I obeyed. Holmes held the locket beneath his lens, his hands steady despite the drama about him. At length he uttered a short, grim laugh. As I thought, "See here, the thread has been renewed. The verdigris upon the clasp is fresh, not the residue I scraped away last night. Someone within this house has armed it anew. That someone had access while we supped, and lured Cecil to his death under promise of safety." Lady Blackwater's face blanched. "Then my husband's cousin, Charles, he must be here, but where?" Holmes's gaze flicked about the gallery, lingering upon the heavy curtains, the shadowed recesses between portraits, the doors standing ajar. He moved swiftly to the nearest curtain and swept it aside. Only darkness met us. Yet as the thunder rolled again, a faint creak sounded from the panelled wall. Holmes pressed his ear, then rapped lightly. "A passage, Watson. The old houses of Cornwall abound in them. and if I mistake not, our quarry retreats even now." Lestrade called for his men, but Holmes silenced him with a gesture. "Too many feet will only scatter the scent. Watson, you and I will follow. Lestrade, guard the ladies. The murderer may yet seek to strike again." With that he pressed upon a carved boss in the panelling, and the wood swung inward upon hidden hinges, revealing a narrow stair spiralling into blackness. The air that issued forth was stale, with the sour tang of mould. Holmes lit his lamp and stepped within, his shadow leaping grotesquely on the walls. I followed close, my revolver drawn, my nerves taut. The stair descended into the bowels of the chase, twisting and groaning beneath our tread. At intervals we found discarded scraps, wax stubs, a rusted tool, a strip of cloth that spoke of furtive habitation. At last the passage opened into a low chamber, its walls dripping with damp. Upon a rough table lay vials, powders, and instruments of curious make, their purpose half alchemical, half infernal. And beside them, scattered pages covered in cramped hand, lay plans for the locket itself, diagrams of its reservoirs, notes upon tinctures, calculations of dose. Holmes held one page to the light, his lips tightening. "Here is our author, Charles Blackwater, beyond doubt. He perfected the device, then fed the legend, using Cecil as his mask. When Cecil wavered, he ensured his death. Diabolical yet elegant." A noise behind us, soft, deliberate, made us spin. From the shadows of the chamber, a man emerged, thin, cadaverous, with hair lank about his shoulders and eyes gleaming feverishly. His voice was hoarse, yet carried a dreadful pride. At last, the great Sherlock Holmes steps into my laboratory. "You were quicker than I reckoned, sir, but not quick enough. For the widow's locket belongs not to Cecil nor Eleanor, but to me, and by it I shall carve my name into history." Holmes raised his lamp, its glow catching the wild features before us. His tone was calm, but I saw the danger in his eyes. "Charles Blackwater, your history is written already, in poison, in fear, and in fratricide. Tonight it shall end." Charles Blackwater stood framed in the dim recess of the chamber, his gaunt figure seeming less a man than a phantom drawn from the damp stones themselves. The lamplight revealed the sharp planes of his face, the restless glitter in his eyes, and the twitch of long fingers stained with chemicals. He advanced a pace, spreading his hands, as though addressing a jury. "You see my work laid bare, Mr. Holmes. Years of study, years of exile, all poured into that single relic. They called me a dabbler, a fraud, a disgrace to the family name. Yet it is I who unlocked the secret of the widow's locket, I who bent fear into a weapon, and now even you, the great detective, are but a fly in my web." Holmes's lamp cast his own shadow tall upon the dripping wall, but his voice remained cool, deliberate. "A web woven of poison and deceit. You speak of years of study, yet what have you achieved but the death of a poor clerk and the ruin of your own kin? Cecil lies above, stiffened by your contrivance. Was he no more than another pawn in your pursuit of notoriety?" A flicker of something passed over Charles's face. Was it triumph or the madness of conviction? Cecil was weak. He longed for the estate, but lacked the will to seize it. I offered him power. He became the mask behind which I could work. When his doubts grew, he was no longer useful. Better that the locket take him, as it will take any who oppose its destiny. And you, Holmes, are you bold enough to test it yourself?" He reached to the table, snatching up a second case, a twin to the widow's locket. My heart leapt as I realized he had fashioned more than one. He held it aloft, the chain dangling, the oval gleaming with sinister promise. "Stay where you are," I cried, leveling my revolver. My hand shook despite my effort to steady it. Drop that infernal device, or by heaven, I'll fire." Charles only laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Bullets cannot halt an idea, Doctor. This locket is no longer a bauble, it is a legacy. Through it I command dread itself. Imagine nations trembling at the thought of its curse. Imagine rulers bending to the unseen hand of the Blackwater line." Holmes moved between us with a suddenness that startled even me, his voice cutting through the cavern like a blade. "Enough! You would cast yourself as master of empires, yet you could not even govern your own house. You rely not on intellect, but on terror, and terror is a blade that turns in the hand. See where it has brought Cecil. See where it will bring you." Charles's lips curled. "Fine words, but you misjudge me. I am not so reckless as my cousin. This locket is armed differently. I alone know the balance of tinctures, the precise pressure needed. To any other hand it is death, but to mine it is obedience." Holmes's eyes narrowed, and I could sense the silent calculation racing behind them. He gestured faintly toward me. "Hold your fire, Watson. He speaks truth enough to make gunplay dangerous. One shattering shot, one careless fall, and we may all be seized by the fumes of his devilry." The chamber seemed to shrink with the weight of suspense. The storm above thudded faintly through the stones like a giant's heartbeat. Charles set the locket carefully upon the table and spread his arms once more. "You cannot touch me without touching death itself. Even now Lestrade guards the widow and her servant. Convinced the danger is past, they will not suspect until I come for them, until I reclaim the estate in the only manner left to me." Holmes stepped forward a single pace. His voice dropped low, compelling. "And yet you miscalculated one thing, Charles. You believed fear would always serve you, but fear is a fire that consumes the hand that feeds it. Cecil feared exposure. He is dead. Briggs feared betrayal. He confessed. Gerald feared hunger. He betrayed your commission. And you, do you not fear me?" For the first time, Charles hesitated. His eyes flickered, his fingers twitched upon the table. Holmes pressed on, his tone relentless. "You stand in your lair, cornered, with every proof of your guilt around you. Do you think the Yard will marvel at your science or the jury revere your genius? No, they will see only a murderer cloaked in superstition. Your name will not be etched in history, but scrawled in shame." Charles's face contorted, pride wrestling with despair. With a sudden cry, he seized the locket again, raising it high. "Then I shall etch it now in your hearts." He moved as though to hurl it against the stones, to shatter its reservoir in a poisonous cloud. In that instant, Holmes sprang like a striking cat. His hand shot out, not for the locket itself, but for the chain, twisting it so that the case spun harmlessly in the air. With his other hand, he struck Charles's wrist, sending the device clattering to the floor, where it burst open upon the flagstones. A hiss of vapour rose, acrid and bitter, but Holmes had already flung his cloak upon it, smothering the fumes. Charles reeled back, his eyes wide with horror. He lunged for the doorway, but I was there, my revolver levelled squarely at his chest. "Not another step," I said, the steadiness of my voice surprising even me. Holmes rose, brushing the dust from his hands. "It is over, Charles. Your weapon is broken, your scheme's undone. You sought to master fear, but you are mastered by it. Lestrade shall have the pleasure of hearing your confession." Charles sagged, his shoulders drooping as though the strings of his madness had been cut. The wild light left his eyes, and he sank upon the bench with a hollow groan. Holmes signalled, and 2 constables hurried down the stair at his call. They seized the wretch, dragging him to his feet. As they led him away, Holmes stooped to recover the twisted remains of the locket. He sealed them in a pouch, his expression grave. "The widow's locket is ended," he murmured, "but the lesson remains. There is no curse save that which men weave from greed and fear, yet that curse can strike as surely as any pestilence if unchecked." We emerged at last into the gallery, where the storm was breaking, its fury ebbing into sullen rain. Lady Blackwater and Alice looked up, relief plain upon their faces, as they saw Holmes safe. He bowed slightly, his eyes weary but triumphant. "Madam, your house is freed of shadows. The name of Blackwater shall be cleansed, not by fear, but by truth." And as I watched her sink into a chair, pale yet unburdened, I felt once more the strange awe that always overtook me at the close of Holmes's cases, that mingling of admiration and wonder that no storm, however fierce, could ever extinguish. The days that followed passed in a calmer rhythm, though their memory shall remain vivid in my mind as long as I live. Charles Blackwater was conveyed under guard to London, there to await trial on charges which Holmes assured me would leave no loophole for escape. His laboratory beneath the Chase, with its vials and notes, was sealed and later presented in court, where the sheer weight of evidence convinced even the most sceptical jurors. The newspapers, ever eager for sensation, spoke of the curse of the widow's locket with lurid flourishes, yet those who had witnessed the matter knew well that the only curse was the corruption of a man's heart. Lady Blackwater, though deeply shaken, bore herself with a composure that earned Holmes's quiet admiration. Alice Rooke recovered her courage once free of the terror that had shadowed her steps, and the two were soon preparing to leave Cornwall for a residence less haunted by memory. Holmes, when pressed for counsel, advised that the locket itself be consigned to the flames, its mechanism dismantled and destroyed. Lady Blackwater hesitated, confessing that she felt bound by her late husband's wish that it remain with her, but Holmes spoke with unusual gentleness. "My lady," he said, "the truest way to honour the dead is not to cling to the instruments of their grief, but to live free of them. This trinket has been made a weapon of dread. To preserve it is to preserve its shadow. Better that it perish utterly, leaving only memory behind." And so, upon a cold evening in the Chase's great hearth, the locket was placed upon the coals. We watched as the gold softened, the miniature blistered, and at last the silver thread curled into nothing. A faint hiss arose, followed by silence. Lady Blackwater wept quietly, not from fear, but from release. As we journeyed back to Baker Street, I could not resist pressing Holmes for his reflections. "You suspected Cecil at first, and indeed so did we all. Yet even after his death you did not rest content. What was it that told you another hand still moved the pieces?" Holmes leaned back against the cushions of the carriage, his eyes half closed. "A simple matter, Watson. Cecil was too direct, too emotional a player. He lunged when patience was required, he confessed when silence would have served. That is not the mark of a true strategist. And above all, the locket itself. When I found its reservoir freshly armed, though I had cleansed it the night before, I knew another mind was at work. Cecil could not have prepared it in the brief hours between. Only Charles, the alchemist, possessed the knowledge and the access. I shook my head in wonder. And yet, to think that fear alone nearly cloaked his villainy from us. Holmes smiled faintly. "Fear, Watson, is the most subtle poison of all. It blinds the eye, stills the tongue, and persuades the mind to accept shadows for substance. That is why such men thrive until they are dragged into the light." Back in Baker Street, the fire glowed warmly, the rain pattered softly at the window panes, and the city outside went about its endless business. Holmes stretched himself upon the settee, pipe in hand, his face once more composed in that curious blend of detachment and satisfaction which always followed the resolution of a case. "You see, my dear fellow, he said between puffs. The affair of the widow's locket was never truly about jewels, nor inheritance, nor even murder. It was about the manipulation of dread. The true detective's task is to strip away such illusions and reveal the plain mechanics beneath. Once the trick is understood, the ghost vanishes. I could not but smile at his words, recalling Lady Blackwater's look of peace as the locket melted into ash. Then you have succeeded doubly, Holmes. You have not only caught a murderer, but freed a woman from a terror that threatened to consume her. Holmes waved the compliment aside with his customary modesty, though I caught the gleam of pride in his eyes. Another case, concluded Watson, and another lesson in human folly. Now, if you will be so good as to hand me my violin, I believe a touch of Bach will restore the equilibrium of the mind after so much dissonance. And so, as the strains of music filled the familiar room, I set down the last notes of a mystery that had begun with a trembling visitor and a cursed locket, and had ended with truth wrested from the heart of darkness by Sherlock Holmes.